games can teach us very valuable lessons. Whether it's a major plot point of a 40-hour JRPG or something small that emotionally resonates with us, like from a side quest, there's so much to take away from the games that we enjoy. And just like games, it's important that we learn from others and try to understand things from their perspective. So in today's program, I had the really great opportunity to catch up with one of my all-time favorite content creators, Kevin Kenson. He's a YouTuber that has almost got 1 million subscribers on YouTube. That's a significant amount, so he's obviously doing something right. So I wanted to learn about his journey. I wanted to learn about him, and most importantly, what's his favorite game of all time? What do you think he's going to say? So before we get to that, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Otherwise, if you're listening to the program on Spotify or Apple, don't forget to follow the program and leave a rating and a review. It really helps kind of boost the show in that algorithm. This is a really great interview, and I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope you guys like it as well. Let's go.
I want to start by telling you that you're one of the few content creators that I would put on, my wife and I would put on while we have dinner. I don't know if that's telling you something specifically, but it's like that you're in the upper echelon of content creators that we'll sit down and actually engage with. And I love that.
Thank you. It's actually interesting. I've heard that from a couple people where it's like, I just like putting you on while I eat. I think it's because I don't hear it personally, but I've had a few people say that my voice is like a good relaxing one. I'm like, it's nails on a chalkboard to me, but cool. But I've heard that a couple times where I'm apparently a very common, like, oh, we're having lunch. Let's put Kevin on.
Yep. Yeah. For us, it was always, when we lived in the States, we're in Australia now, and the reason why I say that is because there are geographical differences in the Chinese food. General Tso's chicken does not exist in Australia. So one of our favorites was General Tso's and fried rice. And we're like, yep, Kevin, there he is on. Whatever. That's
the pairing. As I understand it, multicultural food in Australia can be a bit of a uphill battle sometimes.
It can be sometimes, yeah.
Being where I am, Mexican food is big, and my wife has a few friends in Australia, and so they'd always be like, oh yeah, no, we have a Mexican place by us. Yeah, they make burritos. And we'd get the description, like, that's not, I don't know what that is. There's like kidney beans in it. I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, I know. That's one thing you get used to is the food differences. Like the Mexican food here is different. Dead giveaway is like, any place that claims to be authentic Mexican is far from it. But hey, I haven't had authentic Mexican food, but that's a whole other dissertation.
You just know you haven't.
Yeah, I know. You just that's right. Yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time to be here. It's great to chat with you. Like I said, we're big fans of you around these parts. This podcast is kind of centered around like RPGs and JRPGs, but at the same time, I also want to highlight content creators and shed a little backstory and light on what these people are actually like. And this is a great one because I'm such a huge fan of you, but at the same time, I also don't know anything about you. And I'm sure as content creators who get bigger over time, the less of themselves they want to show. So today, what I essentially want to have the viewers take away is getting into content creation, what I messaged you about before when we were setting this up, like Burnout, and any other advice that you have, and then kind of tying in video games around that. So just a life and games kind of chat, if that works for you.
Sure, yeah.
Great. So because we're RPG centric, what's your favorite RPG of all time? I noticed you are an RPG fan, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I'm generally a fan of single player stuff in general, but RPGs are like the big one for me. I always feel a little bad answering this question because I feel like it's the like no shit, like everyone says that. Oh, sorry, we go with cursing.
That's fine.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just get conversational, and I'll just
just be you. That's fine.
I feel like this is like one of those really obvious answers, but it is true for me. Chrono Trigger has just always been, like that's been the pinnacle for me for so long, and it's not even something that I think it's more true for me because it's not as nostalgia driven. I didn't actually grow up playing it like when it first came out. That was something I went back to later. My introduction actually was like the worst version of it, arguably, which is the PS1 version.
Yep.
And I still was like completely into it. And yeah, that's just always, it's either that one or sometimes if you ask me the right season, I might say Morrowind instead, which is a totally different spectrum of RPG. But those two are like, they very much decided my taste of other stuff that I'm into.
Interesting you say that because every person I've had on the show so far has said Chrono Trigger. And I suppose that speaks to the timeless nature of it. And it shows that, that's a lightning in a bottle, like foundational game for later RPGs, JRPGs, and any other games in between. So it's great. I'm glad that a lot of people love that and will say that unapologetically. So your background in games, like at what point did you start playing, and what point did you start getting into, I suppose, role-playing games before, your whole YouTube stuff?
Sure. Getting into games thing. So I have an older brother, older by 6 years, which is enough of a gap that, when he was the age getting things like a Nintendo Entertainment System and some systems that were maybe a little bit too advanced for when I was really little, I was already around them, because I'd be watching him playing, or I'm sure there were times where I was the annoying little sibling, just, being given a controller not plugged into anything, thinking I'm helping. So like as far back as I remember, I've been playing games. Like there's not really, I can't tell you like, oh yeah, people always like to ask like, oh, what was your first game? I'm like, I have no idea. I can guess. I can tell you what I kind of have vague memories of being around, but it just, as far back as I can recall, I have messed with games to some extent, and then RPGs in general, that did come a little later. When I was younger, I was probably a bit more 2D platformer, top-down action, Zelda, Mario, Mega Man. It's fairly standard, classic retro stuff. And RPGs really started. It was funny, actually. It was almost like I was an outsider for a little while, because I first got into the genre when I didn't have a PlayStation, but a lot of my friends did. And so I was kind of through osmosis learning about, Final Fantasy VII and all these major releases that were coming out then. I totally missed the train of stuff coming out on the SNES, even though I had one. And that prompted me to really go back and look into more RPGs after the fact. It wasn't until I got a PS2 that I worked my way through a bunch of the PS1 catalog by borrowing from friends or renting stuff. I worked my way through stuff that was on the PS2. Later on started playing a lot more stuff that, wasn't available on later systems, but I found ways to play SNES games and such. So it just, once I got into the genre, I was just swimming in it.
Yeah, and it sounds like you were just kind of binging it all at once. Like once you were at a point where you could enjoy these games, you just plowed through and got through all these great games, all these heavy hitter games. Like back at that point, in like the late 90s, early 2000s, that's when all what people would classify as the golden era stuff was coming out. So you were right in the thick of it, enjoying all that. Yeah,
really. I mean, almost at the tail of it, kind of, because like SNES to PS1 is really that like super strong period, and then it was PS2 where we still had great stuff. But it was like I was playing catch up on the last like 8 years of amazing games, stuff that came out from like 95 to 2003. It was like, all right, I'm just going to do all of it. Like right now, I'm just going to play all these games back to back to back.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. I mean, I'm still playing catch up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The backlog is eternal.
Yeah, it is.
There's no end to the backlog.
It is. So what games are you currently playing now? Like right now, I don't know. This show should be released at some stage late May or late April, early May. We're at the end of March right now, so that kind of timestamps where we are.
Well, I mean, speaking as an RPG fan, it has been a wonderful season for the genre. I mean, really, arguably amazing decade. Like 2020 has been a headache for a lot of reasons, but I feel like around then we started seeing a lot of the ports of older stuff, and now it's just been nonstop major RPG releases like every year, which I love. I had a lot going on the last couple of weeks, so I'm actually very behind on a couple games, and as a result, I'm juggling far more than I should be. I'm primarily playing through 7 Rebirth right now, but then I also want to be putting a lot more time into Unicorn Overlord and Dragon's Dogma 2. Like those are like the main 3 games right now that I am putting time into.
Nice. Those are such time-heavy games. Like I'm at the point where I can only play one giant game at once. I'm like 64 hours into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I beat the game 30 hours ago. I'm still going, and I never do that with any of these games. There's so much stuff in that game, and I'm like a clingy parent. Like, I mean, I am in real life, I suppose, but like I cannot let go of this game. It's just so good, and I don't know how you're juggling these other things as well. I mean, there's so much stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's the secret, right? Like I said, I'm very behind right now, and behind for good reason, because there's just so much to do, while also, trying to make content and everything else that just goes with living.
yes, of course. So that's a good segue. You are a YouTuber content creator. In the very slim chance that somebody listening or watching does not know who Kevin Kenson is, please tell me about yourself. Introduce yourself. What do you do? What's your niche on YouTube? All that kind of stuff.
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Kevin Kempton. My YouTube channel is just my name because I never really put time into figuring out any kind of other title. I feel like everyone's got such fun creator alias names, and I'm like, it's my name. I don't know. I couldn't. It's me. Uh, and yeah, I've been doing YouTube for honestly a lot longer than I can keep track of now at this point because I got my start working on other channels first. But this year actually marks the 10-year anniversary of my own channel. We're not quite there yet. I think it's June that's happening. I forget when my first upload was. I need to look that up. That's probably important to remember.
There's some sort of watchdogs thing, because I looked it up last time. Like, when did you start? And it looked like, yeah, you were
I think Transistor.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Yeah, I think that was the first one on my original channel. I think Watch Dogs, you probably stumbled on me on TLD if it was Watch Dogs.
Possibly.
I think that was when I was still doing stuff with John.
Yep.
Yeah. So I've been doing YouTube longer than that, but 10 years is how old my channel is. And, I've never been very good at just explaining what the general direction of my channel is. I feel like I've asked other people, like, well, how would you describe it? And I tend to get gaming lifestyle, I suppose. It's just, news, accessory reviews, setups, although it's been a little bit since my last setup. I should really start thinking about that again soon. It's honestly just really, outside of this actual specific game reviews, which is something I'm starting to try and mess with on a side channel, everything else going on with gaming. That's what I do on my main channel.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see where you are now. I mean, to kind of time skip a little bit to see the contrast of what your channel is like, and not only that, looks like as well, because the visual quality is just insane, and we're gonna get to that. But it's funny because I feel like a lot of other people start at the same point, like covering gaming news and other things that are interesting to them or relevant to them. They're just putting out videos weekly or on a weekly basis, and that's exactly how you started it as well, by the looks of it, anyway.
Yeah, more or less. Well, that's always the interesting thing, is that, like, it's kind of what I fell into doing more often, primarily because I made the very not sane choice of deciding to try to make this my day job, and so with that comes needing to recognize the fact that there are bills to pay, and so really, like, early on, I was trying to do more game review type stuff, and as dense as the space is now, it's in some ways feels like it was more dense back then. Not because of how many people, because even though it was a small pool, it was so heavily tilted in that direction for that kind of content. And I found that when I was doing the more, hardware reviews, accessory reviews, some news type stuff, that would actually tend to do better because not as many people were doing that just yet. Like, I really feel like I started doing that right before it began to propel really hard. Like, I just happened to time it very well. And now that kind of content there's plenty of great people you can find doing that kind of stuff. But when I was first growing the channel, it wasn't quite as common yet. And so it really helped with, like, that's why I ended up leaning into it more, because, like, oh, like, people are watching this. I guess maybe I should review more controllers. Okay, cool.
It's so funny because I think you've hit that niche really well, and you've ran with it for almost a decade now, more or less. Yeah. And that's what people recognize you as if they know you. The gaming lifestyle, I think, is the perfect way that you can encompass, like, what your channel is and what you're doing. So I think it's interesting to go back and just see what you were doing then, and in broad strokes, you're kind of hitting what you're doing now, but I think it's just more refined, and you've found
Sure.
You found your niche and you found your groove, and you're doing that. What exactly got you into creating content? Like, what was the point where, like, I'm gonna do a video on this?
So, honestly, timing, and I guess I could even jokingly say a little bit nepotism. No, so, my generation, a lot of us went to college because we thought we should. Like, it was kind of like you finished high school, cool, go to college, and then you're going to get a job, right? And we were also the generation that found out very much, no, it's not quite that direct of line. Yep. So around the time that I had finished, I got my bachelor's. Honestly, part of the reason I probably had trouble finding work right away too, I may be an English major, so.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah. So I finished up college, and around that time was when obviously YouTube had already been around for a few years. This is about 2010. But that was when you began to see people really start to try and, like, build brands and such on YouTube. It wasn't just people putting up their own silly videos. And at that time, my brother had started working with Jonathan Morrison. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that name, but they had met and decided to get into YouTube. The very first project was actually with my brother That was a music channel. And then John ended up doing a tech channel. That's what really blew up. It was TLD Today for a while, and then more recently just Jonathan Morrison, although he hasn't been uploading for reasons. But that was really where I got my start, was when the tech channel was growing. There was an aspect of like, oh, people are wondering if we're going to do any kind of video game stuff, and neither of them were into that at all. And so here I am, freshly out of college, just like, I play video games. Yeah, I like talking about that stuff. So my first start really was just on that channel, throwing up random game reviews. And because it was a tech channel, we ended up starting doing more like app game coverage type stuff. And that was really what I cut my teeth on initially for content creation. And then eventually, once, you know, the channel thing began to solidify better into what its focus was, and my stuff was still a part of it, but it was kind of like, all right, I think now it's time that like I should just make my own channel. And so, you know, I did that for a few years. Like I said, it's been a decade, and it was really around 2017 that I saw major growth happen, because that was when we really hit the stride of production, and the switch happened, and that was just kind of a golden timing of like, again, oh, people like accessory reviews, I should review more of these controllers, you know. And that was really when I saw a lot of my main growth begin to occur.
I had a question on here that was going to ask, at what point did you see your channel hit a lot of growth? But that makes a lot of sense, because 2017 was huge for a number of content creators out there, specifically maybe not necessarily Nintendo focused, but people who covered Nintendo and then realized like, oh wow, we can cover this. And then, you know, I've known people who have blown up within that 1 or 2 year period point now, where, you know, I mean, you're hovering 840 some odd thousand subscribers. Like, that is a monumental number. And that's all within the last, that's over the last 7 or so years, really.
More or less, yeah. I mean, the road run, and honestly, it's actually over. To be perfectly honest, I've been stagnant for a little while, kind of just ping-ponging a little bit in that area. Most of that growth was really 17 through 2020. Like, that was really those 4 years were like the main growth for me, where you see me go from like, you know, 20K subscribers to now this 840 number.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. I suppose. At what point in your journey did you realize it was something that you could take seriously? I mean, I suppose there's always the amount of seriousness that you want to have when you approach something like this. Like, I don't know if your end goal was to do this full time and be able to pay bills from it, but was there a point where you realized, like, okay, this is actually something that's viable now, and I can support myself and my family doing this?
Sure. So my story is a little weirder on this end, because like I mentioned earlier, I really got my start working alongside other people. And before my channel blew up, John's channel blew up immensely. You know, he was one of the bigger tech YouTubers for a while, in like the kind of, you know, 2010s just throughout. And so because we were doing things as a group, it worked out very well, where it's just kind of like, all right, like the main tech channel is doing really well. I think maybe we can start putting time into maybe getting some other projects up and running. We can all focus a little more. And so I was able to go more full-time earlier than I really should have, if I was just like on my own, because we were working together as a unit and relying on like, okay, we have this one project that's kind of the spearhead. This is already, you know, lucrative enough to help pay people, and use that as an opportunity to help grow these other projects now. So yeah, I was very fortunate in that that's how that situation worked out for me. But I know that it's like, you know, if I was just on my own, it certainly would have been later that I would have been able to make that call. For
sure. I think that's really cool that you can, at least before your channel, before you have firsthand success, you're kind of a part of something else that blew up and realize maybe what goes with that. When your channel was blowing up, I mean, I can't remember when I specifically found it. I feel like it was 2015, 2016. I'm probably one of the OGs that was there before, you know, the Kevin Kenson became a household name.
Appreciate it.
I suppose, like, what were some of the challenges that you started to face, like, as things kind of grew? I mean, did you feel that, or even still now, I'm sure you do, because we'll speak to this soon. Do you feel this pressure to just pump out content like ASAP? I mean, I know you're maybe not as frequent as you...
Honestly, like, and this goes back to the idea of, you know, choosing to make this your full-time job. That certainly adds an extra layer to it versus like doing YouTube on the side for fun. Not like, you can still want growth and everything, but it's a little more different when you still have something else that's your main support.
Yes.
And so there's always a very unfun level of, there's that balancing game of like what you enjoy creating, what's creatively fulfilling versus, okay, I probably need to make a Switch 2 rumor video or got to talk about whatever thing that's going on right now. Because it's just like, at the end of the day, people are looking for what they're looking for, and there's always headaches that comes with some of that, right? Whether it's because there is the content you put your heart and soul into, and that ends up being the 10 of 10.
Yep.
And then, you have like the quick reactionary, oh, this news just dropped, I'm going to talk about it real quick and throw something up. And it's like, okay, that's 1 of 10. Neat. Love that. It's like, it's great when it happens, and it's also like a little bit of salt on like the other stuff that you care more about,
I know.
And that's like the big battle, I think, for a lot of people when they get into content creation, especially if they're trying to, do it as a profession, is this balance of like what you find creatively fulfilling and then what keeps the lights on, And I think some people are very lucky in that they're able to just hit that balance right away. I mean, there's always those cases of people that have the explosive growth and they find their niche right away. And I'm sure even they get tired of it after a certain time. And it's like, all right, I want to try something new now. Oh, never mind. Okay.
Yep.
And that's just always, I think, the battle for content creation is, balancing out the fun versus what ends up being a reality, especially if, again, it's what you're doing for living.
For sure. And I think this is something you spoke to in one of your videos a couple of years ago now. It feels like yesterday, honestly. The last few years have just flown by. But there was a point in one of your videos where you spoke about burnout. And is this because, you have this pressure of like, I need to do a 1-on-1 video, I need to try and ride the Switch 2 rumors or the Switch OLED comes out, like you hit those highs, then you realize it's not sustainable to do that kind of stuff. And that's what leads you to like, I just want to quit. Is that how you kind of fell into this burnout phase?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, that's certainly a large part of it. To be honest, the burnout video back then, and a lot of this is still true to this day to an extent, a lot of that was multiple things all at once. It was that general creator burnout, but then it was compounded a little bit by just what 2020 and 2021 were. For sure. Just the state of the world. And, I had some also just personal things that happened around the same time. And so it was just so much all at once that at the time really led to me just doing that video. Like, I'm slowing down, guys. I'm going to slow down for a while. I don't know when it's going to fully change. And it's something that I've definitely gone in waves with. I've had good months where it's like, I'm feeling it, the creative energy's there, or the right circumstances are there, where it's just, hey, Switch OLED dropped. We're going to make a ton of videos and we're feeling great about what we're making. And then it's like, oh man, we're in the middle of like just a content drought and I got to figure out what I'm talking about right now. And it's actually one of the funny things to talk about right now with like Switch 2 rumors, right? Is I think so many people who especially rely on product for what they do, some people talk about, oh, Switch 2 is looking delayed. Well, that's fine for picking it up. And like, I totally agree. But on the other hand, there's the creator side of me that's like, I was really hoping that'd be out these holidays. So I could like, there's my content plan for like September through December.
Yeah.
And it's like, never mind. It'll be whenever it comes out, And so, yeah, it's a constant wave, right? You have your ups and downs, I think, with all things. And that's kind of how burnout works a little bit too. You're going to have your good times where you feel it. And then the times where it's like, you need to have the discipline to keep stuff going, because obviously you can't just up and disappear, especially with the way YouTube works. But it certainly is a much more grueling experience versus when you're riding those highs.
For sure. And I think, especially for somebody who more or less talks about hands-on products like lifestyle stuff, I suppose when you are in that phase where you're waiting for the next big thing to come out, like, how do you find stuff to look for? I mean, because I don't cover tangible stuff. Yeah. Like, I'm just like Final Fantasy, whatever. Like, there's an almost infinite pool of stuff to talk about there. But for physical tech, like, how do you lean on like certain trends or whatever? Like, especially when there's a drought. Like, what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, it varies, right? I mean, you really just need to keep your finger on the pulse of everything going on. I mean, a large part of that, obviously, that we've been kind of seeing lately is just speculation, leaks, rumors, that kind of stuff always ends up being a part of it, even though it gets be very much a headache over time because, I do my best to parse between stuff that I think is more believable and real, but you're always battling a constant rumor where other people are just kind of throwing out whatever they happen to see, or, sometimes it's misinterpreted, sometimes willfully, sometimes not, and it's a lot. But that's part of it, the speculation game. Obviously right now, Switch 2, PS5 Pro, there's been a whole Xbox handheld thing the last couple weeks. Yep. So, that's all stuff that people talk about and mess with. Another thing is just staying on top of things like accessory roundups, maybe going back to stuff that I have covered before, but it's like, hey, like if you didn't see me cover this thing 2 years ago, like I'm just kind of wrapping up right now all my favorite stuff that's like this. And so, revisiting and double downing some of that content, which I think some people are a little afraid of doing sometimes because there's this idea of like, oh, I don't want to like over inundate my audience with the exact same thing. But also what a lot of people don't always realize is that you have a core audience for sure, but also there's a lot of people that maybe watch you oddly here and there, just once or twice. Audiences are always shifting a lot more often than I think some people realize. And then on top of all that, it's just experimenting with other content.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to not be afraid of maybe recycling some of your content and revisiting stuff, especially as one's channel grows. I mean, right now I'd say you definitely have your core audience. They're there. They're going to show up.
Yeah, sure.
But I think it's a good idea to revisit stuff like Switch accessories you might not have put in whatever. It's definitely a great idea, and it's a healthy idea to revisit that, especially when you're running dry on stuff, waiting for Switch 2 to launch now.
Or whatever products, right? Like, fingers crossed for a few of these things we're seeing coming up, because that's going to be fun content to do. But until then, got to experiment a little more, which I will say, something else that I do a little less often on my channel, but I'm looking to do a little heavier this year. I also really enjoy doing stuff like some of the retrospectives, or looking back a little more kind of documentary style on older things, how some of the gaming tech has developed the way it has. That's always kind of very more interesting. It's a little more involved of a process, because it's not so much like I went hands-on with a controller for 48 hours and here's my thoughts. But it's also a little happier on the brain. It's a bigger gamble too, but it's very nice when they work out and come out nicely.
Yeah, I agree. And that segues into my next question, I suppose. When you are in those, maybe not necessarily when you are in those burnout phases, but you're always looking for that next creative outlet, that video that's going to be fulfilling, even if it's not a 1 of 10. At least you have a good mindset while you're doing it. And once you put it out there, it's going to be what it is. The videos that I've really enjoyed that you put out are the ones that do feature some older stuff. Especially ones with some newer spins. What was it? A good one in recent memory was when you were talking about the Analog Pocket dock and stuff, and seeing you. Did you have it on a CRT in your video?
Yes, we messed with a couple. I did a couple different Analog Pocket videos, but I do believe we messed with doing it on a CRT for one of them.
Yep.
Running it through and doing an adapter. I believe that's when we did. It's definitely an idea I pushed. I can't remember off the top of my head right now.
I think so.
What made it into a final video, but.
Yeah, but I think it's cool that you can, because you have your core audience and people will show up, you can take those tech ideas and spin it into, I'm going to talk about something old, but I'm going to talk about it in a way where we can highlight and learn from it, and maybe compare it to something newer, or a newer product that does an older thing, like an Analog Pocket there.
Yeah, well, and that's the kind of product that honestly gets my brain going the most. I love that kind of when new meets old tech type stuff. Like when it comes to figuring out the best way of using an old system on modern hardware, getting some of the fancier upscalers that are out there, like the RetroTink, or even reverse, like, doing the best you can with getting a good CRT experience stuff. That's stuff that I always really enjoy a lot, because it's how do you make games look the way you remember them?
Yeah,
which is not always how they actually looked, but it's, you know what I mean? It's like, how do you get this really good crisp look? You're just like, oh, this looks amazing. And, it just brings back the experience the best way possible.
That's so funny you say that, because there is some blurred lines between what you remember and what actually is. So oftentimes, like, people will plug in their Super Nintendo or whatever, or PlayStation 1 into their 80-inch Vizio, whatever, and it's like, wow, this looks bad. It's like, yeah, no doubt. But then once you crisp it up, or even when you play through like an emulator or something like that, it's like, okay, yes, this is how I remember. There's a lot of clarity to that. It's funny how that works, I suppose.
Oh yeah.
What are the videos you find most creative, like creatively rewarding? Are they those ones, like those retrospective ones, or the ones that kind of tickle your brain a little bit?
That's certainly, yeah. It's inspiration is an annoying thing like that, because that's the other thing about being content creators. You have to learn to not rely just on inspiration, but it's great when you have it and you can grab a hold of it and go with it. And so it's kind of funny sometimes what stuff does resonate with me or not on that, but that does more often tickle my brain a little more. Like, yeah, Analog Pocket was a big thing for me that I was very excited about. Some of the more recent upscaler type stuff, I really got excited with. I don't know if there's a very good predictable rhyme and reason. Sometimes I just see a thing and you just feel the brain activates. You're like, oh, I'm excited about this thing. I want to talk about it. I will say lately, honestly, while that stuff has in the past, I think I'm actually a little more right now leaning back into wanting to talk more about games themselves. And it's just because I've been on the tech side of things for a while. And ultimately, the tech side of things is what, again, like we've said, keeps the lights on.
Yes.
But getting into not necessarily just criticism, but just talking more about actual game stuff feels better for me lately. And probably because it is a bit of a change of pace, and it's something I haven't been able to do as often as part of my core content. But even, I was mixing a couple reviews in over the last couple of years. I did a couple uploads in 2020 and early 23 until I made a side channel, which has like 4 videos on it now, because it's just whenever I find the time to be able to put the energy. But really, some of the videos that I was able to knock out quickly and get excited about were like sharing experiences for very specific games that I'm just want people to know about. A big one for me was when Live Alive, the remake, happened.
Yes.
Because that was the game that outed a lot of people who emulated in the late 2000s.
It did.
Because it's like, how did you know about this game before? It's like, I played it somehow. And so, me and all the other people with that experience lost our minds when the remake was announced.
Yeah.
And so that was a game that I was very excited to just make some content on right away, because it felt like this moment of like, you all don't understand like how special this game is and it needs to be played. Like, just do it.
It's so good.
And so that was a big, I feel like that was a little too long ago to be the last time I felt very rewarded, but that was, I think, the biggest rush I had lately, just because it had this moment of just like, yes, the people need to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's one of those games that had been stuck in like the translation scene for years, and there's so many great JRPGs that are just never coming out because they're stuck in Japan. And this is a prime example of that. And people like, okay, I would say it's the precursor to Octopath because of how it plays out. So people who like that game or that style of game, go back and play this one, because this is great. This would I didn't play it. I was not part of the emulation or pirate or translation scene. But this game totally blew me away. Like, I was very pleasantly surprised. I loved it. And I think it's great that you were able to talk about it. And I suppose this is some great insight for content creators. If you're finding that your main channel, like your shtick is like lifestyle and gaming stuff, what do you do when you want to talk about something else, like a JRPG on your channel? Like, do you just put it on your channel, hope for the best, or is that a point where you split off, still under your own brand as Kevin Kenson? It's like Kevin Kenson 2, where you can talk about stuff that you actually want to talk about.
So that is the route I ended up going, was making a second channel. But before that, I did experiment with putting stuff on the main channel as well. The headache with a lot of this, and this is extremely unhelpful advice, but it's also just, I feel this to be the truth.
Yeah.
The way content creation works, and the way putting stuff, whether it's on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, whatever, just wherever you make your content, I feel like while there are certain general rules you can apply, no two situations are the exact same. No two audiences are the exact same. There's going to be situations where, doing certain pivots or doing certain changes or doing certain kinds of experimental stuff might actually work better for you than it does for someone else, And for me, I found that doing stuff on the main channel worked to an extent, but I decided eventually that side was the way to go, because of, it was really two things. It was even though some review type videos did a lot better than I expected them to, what I really found for why splitting off made sense for me was because, I could put something up on my main channel and sometimes it would work out. Like, I did a Triangle Strategy review that actually didn't do too bad. It got like 35k views or something, great. Which I know that's great, but that's also when it's surrounded by like 80k to 120k videos and that kind of thing.
It's a 10 out of 10.
It brings, Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like it's good and avoid, but you look in the context of the rest of the channel.
Yes.
And so, there was that kind of thing of like, well, ultimately, if this is the thing that actually is, the bread and butter, maybe it's better to maintain as strong of a momentum there as I can, even though it's cool to put that kind of stuff on occasion. And the other thing I found too, though, is that making a side channel, especially when you're using a pre-existing platform to help launch it, can actually be much more successful out of the gate than you might first think. When I made my side channel, again, it's only got like 5 or 6 videos.
What's your
it.
side channel called?
I'm consistently doing stuff. Next Side Quest.
I'm gonna look that up.
So, yeah, you can do it by the ad. It doesn't actually have like because they changed the way that whole getting URLs works.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But like, for instance, I put up a couple videos right away, and some of that was just me being like, hey, like, here's a post on the main channel, and here's me on socials being like, you should go check this out. And the algorithm really likes when a brand new channel is just getting watched.
Yep.
My third upload was, I just got like into the EXO Primal Beta a little early. So I was like, okay, sure, yeah, I'll just talk about this. I don't do a ton of multiplayer stuff, but I actually kind of enjoyed it. So I made a video. And it got like, I don't know, like 60, 80K views or something. I lost track now, but it was like, that's the third upload on like a fresh channel. Yeah, like ridiculous. Like it did better than any like gaming video I did on the main channel. And of course, as it goes, that was the one I was less excited about compared to like talking about Sea of Stars or some other stuff.
Yeah.
But it's just funny how that kind of works out. And so I found that, using the platform built on the other one, it's not that hard to hit similar view counts on a fresh new channel than if I just put up this risky thing. Because ultimately the core audience that cares about that, they're going to find their way to that other channel.
Yes. It's interesting because this is some good insight for people who, I suppose that the fear is that you get stuck as like, I don't know, the PSP guy, right? And then it's like, how am I going to sustain this for indefinite so I can pay my bills? Assuming, you get to that point where you're partnered and you're getting monthly payouts or whatever. I suppose you do have to have that urge to create stuff, and if you can't put it on your channel, or if it's not going to be sustainable, you have to find another avenue to do it. Because I suppose I'm still just kind of getting into this myself as my channel grows, but like YouTube won't reward you for making creative risks, especially if it doesn't pay off, especially if it is a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, well, and that's always the biggest headache too, is that the other really fun part about content creation, I feel like most people who have done it long enough just know this is a thing, and it's if there's any kind of piece of advice I can give to someone first getting in, enjoy figuring out the algorithm. Because there's just going to be times where you take those creative risks, and sometimes it will pay off. Like there will be that time where you make that really interesting, creative, different piece, and it blows up because you had the right thumbnail, it got the watch time, it did all the things right, and then you can try to replicate that, and it will be a 10 of 10. You can try to replicate that, and it'll be an 11 of 10. Like it's just, there's going to be times where you think you have a grasp of like, okay, I know what it likes now. Never mind, I was wrong.
It's the gamble every week that you upload.
Yeah, for sure. Even with stuff that you think is bread and butter, it isn't always, because times change, audiences change, news cycle changes. It's everything is in such a constant state of flux, and that's also why what I said earlier about how like there's not that many great permanent rules. There's some stuff you can talk about, right? Like, yeah, be engaging. Yeah, make sure to do things in your edit to make sure the watch time stays longer. Think about your thumbnail. There's things you can say like that, but even the specific rules of what makes something engaging or what makes something appeal to someone, when you make a thumbnail that looks different and interesting, but now that's the style and meta that everyone uses, it's no longer quite as interesting. I think I saw Mr. Beast did a whole thing about this because we have the thumbnail comparison that you can work with now, or at least some channels do. And he was saying how like, oh yeah, I've seen a trend now where thumbnails where I'm smiling and showing my teeth don't work as well as smiling and I don't. And it's like, that used to be the old meta, is like, make the goofy over the top YouTube face with mouth open. It's like, oh, everyone did that long enough where, we joked about it being dumb, but it still works. Yeah. And now we're hitting the point where it actually maybe isn't working like it used to. And now you should move away from that. It's a game that is constantly changing, because it's not only the rules of the YouTube algorithm and what analytics it wants to focus on, but it's also just straight up human psychology and social trends.
It is.
Like this stuff is just always shifting. And that's one of the biggest head scratchers when you're trying to, make stuff regularly, is like, are you still doing it the right way, or is it time to pivot and change and update and, get with the times, because the times are always changing.
Yeah, they are. And I suppose that the consistent thing, I suppose, is you do have to be uploading whether or not it's going to work or whatever. And the one thing that at least I've found is that YouTube does kind of reward consistency in a way. At least if you're still going,
Yes.
your channel is still churning over videos. Because I started YouTube in 2012, but then there was also a point where I took many years off. I initially started in the retro gaming space. I was doing like ColecoVision and Vectrex reviews, like all that kind of stuff. But then my interests changed, and I'm like, I'm going to continue doing that. So early last year, I started doing Nintendo focused content and retro gaming content again. I'm like, it's not working. I took more time off, and I'm like, screw it. I'm just going all JRPGs, all RPGs, and boom, there it is. Like, I've had the most growth I've had. But I suppose a part of that is also the consistent uploads. And then as people find you and share, blah, 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 like it grows that way. So I suppose it's interesting. And but again, the one thing that you did pinpoint is the thumbnails. That's the hardest part, is because you have to have, I suppose, like well, at least for me, I have a thumbnail template that I use and I alter. But then it's like, do I put myself in it? Do I not put myself in it? And I know you've done that as well. Like you've been in your thumbnails, and sometimes you're not on your thumbnails. Like, how do you decide that?
Yeah, I whims a little bit. No, like honestly, it's purely experimentation, and sometimes it's based on the content where I'm like, okay, this is a thing that everyone's talking about, and maybe it's a benefit to have my face in it because it's like I'm trying to be like, oh, here's Kevin's take on it or something. And sometimes it's like, you know what, I'm just talking about this weird freaking thing, and I think the weird freaking thing by itself in the thumbnail says all it needs to say. Like it's you kind of just come up with it as you go along and figure out. And there's a lot of A and B. Like the feature where you can actually now do two thumbnails and compare them immediately is really nice. I actually don't have that feature yet. Some people do. It's been rolling out slowly. But before that, having that option, what I've done, and I still do to this day, is sometimes I'll put a thumbnail up and then pay attention to analytics for the first hour, and I'm like, oh, you know what? I have this other one. I'm going to put this other thumbnail in and just see if click rate goes up or not. Because it's actually funny. I remember stumbling on like a Reddit thread one time where someone was like, "Oh man, I hate that Kevin does this because he's just trying to trick you to watch the same video twice." I'm like, what?
No.
Why would I ever want that? That doesn't help me at all. I'm just trying to get people to click that may not have if they didn't like another thumbnail. Because that's again, the specifics change, but in terms of like generic advice and stuff, the one thing I will say is that like you're not thinking about your thumbnails enough. I'm not thinking about my thumbnails enough. Like it's such a stupid important thing where you can put all this effort into a 20 to 30 minute masterpiece. You can make an extremely well built documentary or something, and then because you have the plainest thumbnail, it's like, cool, 5 people watch.
Nobody's watching.
Because it's just people need a reason to sit down and watch it. There needs to be a reason to think, oh, maybe I'll click this. And it's such an important thing that oftentimes gets thought about last, and it really should not be.
Oh, yeah. What I've started doing now is I will make the thumbnail before I even write the script, because if the thumbnail looks okay, then I can go with that idea. Great. If I can figure out some sort of general idea based on the topic I want to talk about, if the thumbnail looks good, great, I'll do that. I'm putting more focus in the thumbnail now than I ever have been. And everybody's so visual based. I mean, of course, YouTube is a visual platform, but literally, if that thumbnail is not likable or clickable, say goodbye to your views on that video right there, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. And like sometimes it works out, but like I've had some videos that have low click-through rate, but because the watch time is great or other stuff, it ends up taking off and growing over time because YouTube will keep feeding it. But it absolutely makes a world of difference when it's like, oh man, like this video is getting 15% click-through right away. That's amazing.
That's insane.
That's insane when those days happen, and you see that difference because it's not only it's more exponential than I think some people realize, because it's not just a matter of like, 7% more people than average are clicking, but now YouTube's going, oh, I'm going to feed this more because people are clicking it. And so now it's, that's a percentage of a way larger chunk of actual impressions being served. We're getting into analytics nerdy here, but
but it's good.
You get what I'm saying.
This is good because I mean, there's still a large portion of this that I don't understand. But I think a lot of content creators don't understand it either. It's just kind of you're throwing your caution to the wind. You truly don't know if something's going to succeed or not, even if your research and analytics is sound. Things could change in 24 hours.
Well, and that's the thing too, right? Is that it's like the theory of what works and doesn't work remains the same, right? good watch time, good click through, those are important. But the actual specific rules and laws of, well, what makes good watch time? What makes good click through? Like that stuff is always changing. And so that's, we kind of talked about this earlier, just as content creators, like that's the biggest game. And I think one of the things that can really be grueling is like just keeping up with what works and what doesn't. And that's why you'll see creators where it's like for a month or two, they just get no views. It'll happen, like you'll have your droughts where even though you're uploading regularly, nothing's taken for whatever reason. And then it's like, hey, the right 3 videos in a row got uploaded and now you're back in, 1 of 10 back to back to back. It's just the discipline to keep at it is one of the most important things, because it's not going to get better by not uploading.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've had the 1 of 10 instances where like I'll upload a video, great, it does 1 of 10. I'm like, I can't top. There's no way I'm going to top this following week. Oh my god, it's 1 of 10 again. Like it's like hitting the lottery. It's really great. I suppose in terms of YouTube, and you did mention this at the very very beginning of the interview today. Rolling with your name, Kevin Kenson, as your name, it's your government name, but I mean it's your channel name. Do you have any regrets about doing that, or you just roll with it now? Because the reason why I'm asking this is because I've had different channel names over the years. I just decided, screw it, I'm gonna be myself online. I'm gonna have my name. I'm gonna be my brand. And you are one of the people that I looked at, and I'm like, he's doing it, I can do it. And that gave me a lot of confidence in doing that. But I suppose in saying that, do you have any regrets about having your name as, like, you are the face of the show, you're your own brand?
Honestly, no, not really. I think it depends a little bit on what exactly you're trying to do with your content a bit. And I think because my content is so centered on like me just kind of following my whims a little bit, right? I mean, I've fallen into a specific thing with the lifestyle and accessories, that kind of stuff. But because it is all focused on like me giving my views on things, I think it works out very well. If I was trying to, I think there are certain branding choices that can be better if you're trying to make for a very specific niche content and you want like a cool name that goes with that. Obviously, I had to come up with a different name for my side channel. In my case, I don't have... Using real name is always a bit of a headache too, because that does open up certain things,
sure
right?
Does.
It's like your real name's out there, and so it's like you better be on top of making sure some stuff's getting wiped, and like so like you don't want people finding your home phone number or whatever, that kind of thing. There's a bigger headache that comes with that. I will say that for my own experiences, it has worked out pretty much mostly fine, but I could absolutely understand why it isn't someone's first choice.
I suppose in saying that, well, you could touch on it as much as you want or not at all. Have you had any instances where like somebody messages you on Facebook or your personal Facebook page is like, I am in love with you, Kevin? Like, have you had anything like weird like that, or you've been mostly okay?
Mostly okay. Yeah. I've never really, I've been very lucky, and I don't know if it's because, one of the like, this is kind of a bad thing and kind of a good thing. I feel like I've never been a big one to like stir the pot in a way. Like I just kind of, I make my stuff, I throw it out. I tend to try to also be fairly like even-handed with most stuff. Like when I don't like something, I'm not just like, man, this stuff is total bullshit, this sucks. I'm like, no, like I get why this isn't for me, and I see what's good about it. And I'll call out something that's just straight up bad. But I've generally avoided being like reactionary, wild stance stuff on the internet. Like I don't provoke a lot of arguments, So I think that kind of works out a little more for me because I'm not actively antagonizing any particular person.
Yeah, fair enough.
Whereas, if you're using your real name and you're making, spicy titles and thumbs and statements on the internet, it's probably gonna come a little more back at you.
Yeah, and in saying that, how do you probably don't care now? How do you deal with people who give you a little bit of spice in the comments as well? I mean, this is just speaking to people who might be newer or maybe don't understand. Like, do you read every comment that comes through, or you just read it for the first 2 hours? Or
so honestly, like full honesty here, I'm actually relatively thin-skinned. Like, especially for how long I've been in the internet, it's actually something I really need to work on, and I've been trying to work on. And so a way that I dealt with comments for a long time was, no, I abandoned those so fast after. Like I was pretty good about being on top of comments, in my smaller kind of upstart years. And I think I was also a little more up to like try to fight people back then. They'll just be like, no, you're full of shit or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
And then really once the channel blew up and comments started becoming a lot, like there was way more of them. It was no longer like, oh, you got like 15 comments. You know, now it was like, oh, I'm having videos where like this has a lot of comments, especially when I would do like Xbox versus PlayStation stuff. That's always, that invites
people take it personally.
Certain ideas.
Yeah.
Some people do. And so for a long time, I just abandoned them. And I've been trying to change that lately. I've actually been trying to do more of like the first 2 hours kind of thing, where it's like, all right, like be around, interact with people right away, especially because when you're doing the first 2 hour thing, it's mostly like your core audience, and it's good to like actually engage with them. And it's a very important thing, honestly. Like if you have the stomach for it, be on top of it, because it's such an important thing that I lightly regret not cultivating that skill sooner. And it's something I'm trying to course correct more now, because like YouTube comments suck. I don't know what it is. Like there's always going to be support. There's always going to be good stuff too, but there's just sometimes you're bringing out those people that just want to look for a fight.
So, you know,
it doesn't matter what your stance is, what you're talking about.
It doesn't matter. And you can have 100 nice comments. And like, I've gotten to this point where I'm like, I'm in no means blowing up at all, but like, I'll read the nice comments and I'll be like, okay, cool, whatever. And then I'll get the one comment and then I'll stop and I'll start to reply. I'm like, why am I not rewarding the nice people for saying nice things and taking time out of their day? But yeah, I want to focus in on that 1 out of 100 negative comments. I oftentimes have a full reply written, and I will not. I won't engage with it. I'll just leave it, or I'll just hide user from channel and just have that be that, and let them sit in their own echo chamber. But but like you, I'm trying to do better, but I am a little bit, thin skinned, because like some people will say stuff that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no, it's just human nature for some folks. Like some people are very good at being that kind of combative or like get right in right away, and some people are just like, man, why you gotta be a jerk right now? Like I don't even know you. Like what am I some people are better at dealing with others. I would say that I'm generally not as good as I probably should be at this point. And that's just you go work on it.
Exactly. This is something you have to work on, and just read it and just let it go right through you, and like, okay, yep, I've done that. It didn't faze me. But somebody was like, in my last video, somebody was like, you're totally discrediting yourself for saying Final Fantasy 16 was great and that Clive was a great protagonist. I immediately replied, I'm like, I'm more than happy to discredit myself because I love that game. Clive was great. And I like that reply had like 11 thumbs up, and everybody's like, yeah, great, cool. I love that game. Did you even play that game? Like, what are you talking about? So it's like, occasionally I'll try and get in there, but I am not a confrontational person whatsoever. But sometimes I got to have my say.
Yeah, no, for sure. Absolutely. And that's just, it's part of just, if you're going to be doing this, as much of a headache as it is, it's a good thing to just be better about dealing with it. And some people, you get the right explosive growth and you're lucky and you don't have to. But if you really want to work on growing a community, and also just really trying to also like foster that better kind of community with everyone, like moderate your comments, get rid of the negative stuff if it's just being negative for no good reason, like it's better for everyone that's being involved in watching your content.
I agree. Speaking of watching your content, I do want to say that you are one of the few YouTubers that I watch that has a unbelievable amount of production value that goes into what you create. And this has been on like one of the first questions I wrote is talk about Kevin's camera and talk about camera. Like there's a lot of that I don't understand, but the visual aspect of your channel is one of the strongest. And I think that's what really drew me to your channel initially, and it's only gotten better over time. Like for the camera nerds out there, like just describe what you do. Like, is it just you that does all this stuff? Like, I mean, do you have a production team?
Yeah, so actually for a while I did have a production team that actually literally changed just a couple weeks ago. We're having some fun changes over here right now. When I first started, I was me on my own, but I was working with, like I said, I started off working on another channel, so I was doing stuff with my brother as well as John. And then as time went on, we built a small company out of it, and so started actually having like a couple other people involved in the process with production. I will say personally, like I always love the positive love for the production value on my channel. For me, I've actually, in my own personal skill set wise, I've learned how to recreate. I don't necessarily always have the best underlying knowledge, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
It's like I know how to make this really great looking shot. I can't tell you why this particular, going for specific shutter speeds and stuff works out the best way it does. I just know how to make this thing look good because this is the skill set that we've cultivated over time of shooting this particular thing. And so, in terms of I think the biggest thing actually that impacts looks for a lot of people on my channel, because when I talk to other people that are into video creation, they're like, yeah, I'm using this good camera, I'm using this thing, and I can't, recreate the way this thing looks. I think the big thing that a lot of people underestimate is actually a lot of things that don't have to do with how expensive of tech you're using, especially nowadays with like how good phones and stuff have gotten.
I'm using my iPhone 15 right now. I sold my Sony camera and I'm using my phone. I don't care. It simplifies the setup. That's honestly, a great point.
You can if you're up to date on phones, if you're using a phone from like the last 3 years, your camera's probably just as good as a lot of entry level gear people were using years ago, well above.
Yeah.
And that's not the make or break. The make or break is how you build what it is you're shooting, because when I talk to people about what they're using for their setups, it's like, well, yeah, you're using a good camera, but you just kind of have like a bright light shining directly on you sitting at your desk or whatever. And like, you're well lit, but it's not necessarily pleasing looking, and so things like, how you're making use of your light sources, how you're shaping light, using bounces in order to add a little soft light to the opposite direction so that there's a little more way that it's contouring your face and features. That actually, I think, plays a much bigger role in what people perceive as like high production value. Because you can buy expensive gear, but if you're shooting a bland looking shot with not good lighting and, you're not thinking of how the frame's constructed, then yeah, it's not going to look great because you're using expensive tech, but what you're capturing itself is kind of whatever. And so that's like the big thing, I think, when it comes to production value and stuff. It's like, honestly, like, use your phone. Like, if you have a recent phone, that's more than enough. Before you start thinking of buying expensive gear for like capturing, think about how you're investing in what you're actually shooting and like how you're shaping that image.
Yeah, that's great advice. And people like I myself for many years have been hung up. Like, I got to get this $1,500 Sony mirrorless camera and it's got to look great. Then I plug it in and I start shooting videos. I'm like, it looks terrible. Like, what's going on? And I think, if you simplify it, use your phone, get some good lights, get some stuff in the background that makes it look like a lived-in scene, there you go. And then you can just figure it out from there. Yeah. And I had the hang up for a long time on quality over quality of the video rather than like how it's shot anyway, rather than the quality of the content. That was my biggest hang up for a long time.
And that's the thing. Content is king. Like, there's a certain degree of like, minimum, like, if you don't have a current up-to-date phone or something you need to update, sure. But outside of just using kind of what's now pretty standard for shooting equipment, like, it really is how you're using it that is so much more important than just what you're using.
Yeah, that's great advice. Now, for sake of time, I don't know how much time you have. I've got 2 more questions for you. The one question that I'm dying to know is, and my wife is going to love that I say this, we love your beanies. Like, I just think it's so great. I honestly, one of the few people that I look at, I'm like, I respect the drip on that. That's great. What are you wearing? Like, what is there a specific beanie that you look into? Or I love it. It's great.
If I'm being honest, there's very little thought that goes in. I'll just be like, I don't like that color, and just like order and pick it up. I don't put that. Honestly, like, the beanie was a thing that I just kind of did early on as like, look, I'm a guy who started balding early. It happens. So I was wearing the beanie as like just like a good way to look consistent because I'm lazy and I don't always shave my head.
Yeah.
And it really just became like, oh man, like, why are you wearing beanies all the time? Like, I don't know, it became the channel identity.
It's your thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. That's great. For your YouTube channel, you've had, just about 10 years now of Kevin Kenson, and it's been really great to follow along with your journey, and it's really great to, know that you like RPGs and JRPGs, a man of culture. But with all that being said, like, and all the stuff that you've done, like, what's next for you? Like, what's the next big thing that you're working on? What do you hope for the next 1 to 2 years? Because, maybe looking at a 5-year plan isn't super viable now, but, what's your next big thing?
It is really funny that we're doing this talk today, timing wise, because like I mentioned, I used to work with the production team and I don't anymore as of very recently. Just going through some shakes-ups and changes right now. I'm basically now no longer working with a lot of people I used to, and I'm now taking more direct full control of a lot more stuff. And so I'm in this interesting transition phase where, to be honest, I don't have the clearest answer for you right now as far as like what's next in terms of what I'm regularly doing, but I'm very excited to be making some changes soon. Like I have some broad general ideas. I want to do stuff with my side channel more. I wanted to get a little more into actual game stuff, not necessarily just criticism, but more like video essay type things. Yeah. There's a lot of things where there's, specific game mechanics or approach design that I've always found interesting. And I'm very big on, when I'm looking at a game critically, I'm very big on the idea of like how certain choices in design shape the player experience and also player choices, like, why it encourages players to play a certain way. Why does one game make loot grinding feel so much better than another?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. That's something I've always been very excited about more in my own time. And so that's something I want to get more into as I build my side channel, as well as getting a little bit more into kind of the retro documentary stuff that I have, dipped my toes in before on the main channel, but I want to get a little more heavier into, especially since we're having a nice little drought anyways in new tech to cover.
Yeah,
aside from PC handheld, that's the booming thing right now.
Yes, it is. And I like that you maybe don't know. Maybe there's a question mark in front of you right now. But I think the important thing is that after all this time, you're still very excited about what's next. Yeah. And yes, of course, you do have your bread and butter, which is the lifestyle gaming stuff. But you do have other avenues that we've learned for the listeners who have learned through the discussion today, like doing side channel or exploring other projects, or maybe at some point you decide to do the Kevin talk show, the podcast. I mean, I don't know. The sky's blue, man, and it sounds great, and it's really great to see you still excited about content after all this time. It's been a long time. 10 years is a long time, but you've done really well.
It's a long time. It's a long time.
So thank you again to Kevin Kenson for coming on the show today. It was honestly kind of like a starstruck moment because I've been watching Kevin Kenson for so long, and to just catch up with him and have a chill chat was really cool. I would almost say I was a bit starstruck, but anyway, if you're watching here on YouTube, don't forget to leave a comment. And again, if you're listening on Spotify and Apple, I would love to hear from you guys. Give some feedback. To make sure to rate and review the show if you can. Thank you again for watching. I can't wait to see you guys on the next one. Take care. Ta-da.